It begins not with celebration, but with silence. The moment a prehistoric child is born, survival is not guaranteed, not even for the next hour. There's no sterile room, no clean towels, no metal scissors. The birth happens in a smoky shelter, or under the open sky, on furs or grass or bare earth. It's not peaceful, it's dangerous. And the real challenge has only just begun. The first breath might come with a cry, or it might not. The cord must be cut with a stone blade. The baby must be warm. The mother, still bleeding, might collapse from exhaustion. And this tiny human, just minutes old, is already in danger from dozens of unseen threats. Infection, cold air, dehydration, starvation, predators, abandonment. In some societies, 1 in 3 babies died within the first week of life. In harsher environments, even more. Hypothermia was an immediate threat. Infants lose heat rapidly, especially with wet skin. Newborns were usually kept skin to skin with their mother or another group member. Animal hides, furs, moss, or dried grass were used as insulation. Fires were kept burning through the night. But firewood was scarce in winter. If the fire went out, a baby could die within hours. Groups sometimes wrapped infants in multiple layers, placing them between warm adult bodies at night. But even this wasn't always enough. The mother's ability to breastfeed was essential. No formula, no bottles. If milk didn't come due to stress, malnutrition, or blood loss, the baby's life depended on another woman. In many cases, a grandmother or another recent mother in the group stepped in. But if no one else was lactating, the baby would weaken within 24 to 48 hours. Some groups fed newborns mashed seeds, bone broth, or chewed tubers as emergency food. But these often caused diarrhea, malnutrition, or infection. A modern infection from the umbilical cord stump is treatable. In prehistory, it was often fatal. A small cut from a rough stone, a bit of dirt in the eyes, mouthful of contaminated water, any of these could kill an infant quickly. Mothers and caregivers used available resources: ash, resin, or clay, as antibacterial powders, herbs with antiseptic properties, smoke from medicinal plants, but there were no guarantees. Sometimes even the best-known remedies failed. Crying baby could be heard hundreds of meters away. Wolves, hyenas, lions, big cats. In predator-rich environments, crying infants had to be kept deep inside camps or caves. Sometimes they were swaddled tightly to muffle noise. Older group members took turns watching fires and listening for danger. Some groups may have even moved camp after a birth to avoid lingering scent trails. The cost of carelessness was high. For everyone, a child born in a hunter-gatherer band was not just the mother's concern. Survival required many hands. Older women helped clean and wrap the baby. Grandmothers offered knowledge of herbs and signs of illness. Older children were often recruited as carriers or fire fetchers. Infants were passed between many arms throughout the day. This wasn't sentiment, it was strategy. Single, exhausted mother couldn't provide enough attention, warmth, and security on her own. Many early cultures didn't name babies right away. Instead, they waited. Days, sometimes weeks. In some cases, babies weren't formally introduced to the group until after the first moon. Know the reason? Infant death was so common that naming a child too early was emotionally dangerous. Archaeological studies show burial sites where many infants appear to have died within days of birth. Some laid to rest in unmarked graves or shallow pits. Death was not the exception, it was expected. A woman who gave birth to 10 children might lose half before they reached their second birthday. Grave sites across Europe, Asia, and Africa show high proportions of infant and toddler skeletons. Many are buried with symbolic objects: beads, shells, even small tools. Grief was part of life. But it didn't stop the group from continuing on. Prehistoric groups were nomadic, constantly moving between seasonal camps. Carrying a newborn during migration meant additional risk. Infants had to be protected from wind, rain, sun, and insects. Mothers had to carry both baby and gear. Frequent stops were needed for feeding, and changing babies were carried in slings or tucked into fur-lined satchels. Fires had to be built fast when stopping. If a baby got sick mid-journey, the group faced a terrible decision: stay and risk starvation, or move and risk the infant. Based on estimates from skeletal data and modern hunter-gatherer studies, 1 in 3 infants died in the first month. Nearly half died before their first birthday. Only 1 in 5 children survived to reproductive age. These aren't just numbers. Every modern human alive today is descended from a long line of survivors, children who lived when most didn't. One child might carry the last hope of a lineage. In small groups of 20 to 40 people, every child mattered. Fewer births meant slower population growth. Infant death threatened group continuity. A successful birth and survival shifted the entire tribe's future. That's why mothers were protected. That's why infants were held constantly. That's why the group worked so hard, for a single new life. And when the child survived that first night, and the second, and the first week, a new chapter began. The fragile, dangerous, incredible world of the first year of life, a time when every sound, every shadow, and every mistake could be fatal. The first birthday of a child in prehistoric times was not a milestone most reached. In fact, many never survived the first month. Those who did were immediately thrust into a world filled with hazards and constant uncertainty. This chapter explores the first year of life for a prehistoric child. What they ate, how they were carried, where they slept, how they were protected, and what it took for a group to keep a single infant alive through 4 full seasons. Breast milk was more than nourishment. It was medicine, immunity, hydration, and bonding combined. For the first 6 months, it was often the only thing an infant consumed. Colostrum, the thick yellowish milk produced in the first few days, was packed with antibodies. If the mother's milk failed due to stress or malnutrition, another lactating woman had to step in as a wet nurse. Full breastfeeding often continued for 2 to 4 years. Introducing solid food too early often led to infections or death. The weaning period, typically between 6 months and 2 years, was one of the most dangerous phases of infancy. Infants never slept alone. They were kept skin to skin with their mothers, grandmothers, or siblings. Sleeping arrangements prioritized shared warmth, especially during cold seasons. Fires were essential, both for warmth and to repel predators, but also dangerous. Many infants likely suffered burns from open flames. Still, the threat of hypothermia far outweighed that of a stray ember. Infants were rarely placed on the ground. They were carried in slings made from bark fiber, hide, or woven grass. On the chest, for feeding and bonding. On the back, during longer walks or travel. In cradle boards, when older, to keep them upright and mobile with caregivers. Constant motion helped with digestion, brain development, and emotional security. Stillness was rare and unnatural. Movement meant survival. Despite all efforts, many infants died within their first year, especially during weaning. Diarrhea from bad food or water was a leading killer. Injury, falls, burns, and animal bites often led to fatal infection. Respiratory illness. Cold nights without proper shelter led to fatal pneumonia. There were no antibiotics, no antiseptics. Wounds were treated with crushed herbs, honey ash or fat poultices, smoke inhalation from burning plants. Some remedies worked, others didn't. Many infants died despite the best knowledge available. Incredibly, many prehistoric infants still thrived. By 3 months, babies responded to faces and voices. By 6 months, they babbled, grabbed objects, and rolled over. By 9 months, many could sit, crawl, and understand gestures. By 12 months, first steps and first spoken words were likely. Milestones were deeply meaningful. A child who walked or spoke early may have been seen as strong, gifted, or even chosen. The care of infants was a shared responsibility. Older children entertained or guarded the baby. Grandmothers were crucial. Studies today show infants survive better when grandmothers are present. Men gathered fuel, hunted, and helped maintain shelter, freeing mothers to focus on the baby. It truly took a village, not sentimentally, but for physical survival. Death was common, but never casual. Archaeological sites show infants buried with care in fur wrappings, with beads, ochre, or symbolic stones. Some were laid beside parents, others in isolated infant burial clusters. Even in times of struggle, babies were mourned and remembered. If a child survived their first year, they were celebrated. They had lived through seasonal migration, at least one winter, the weaning transition, physical hazards, disease, and infection. Some early societies only named children after their first year. Reaching this point meant the child had not just survived, they had proven their potential as a future adult. They were no longer the baby, they were now a person, a growing member of the group, a future survivor. By the time a child reached 1 year old, they had already beaten the odds. But the second year of life brought a new level of risk. The moment they began to move independently, everything changed. Walking was both a milestone and a hazard. Toddlers explored everything: fire pits, water sources, jagged rocks, and wild plants. What they touched, tasted, or wandered into could injure or kill them. For prehistoric families, this phase required constant supervision and creative ways of keeping mobile children safe in an unforgiving world. Children were no longer passive recipients of care. They were learning, watching, mimicking, and often disrupting. This chapter will explore how toddlers fit into daily prehistoric life, how they learned to survive, who protected them, what dangers they faced, and how early childhood experiences shaped the adults they would become. Once a child took their first step, usually between 10 and 14 months, they became exponentially harder to manage. Walking toddlers had access to everything in their environment. Sharp tools left unattended. Bones and shells that could be choked on, fire pits, hot embers, and boiling water, streams, rivers, and steep drops. In camps with open fires, toddlers frequently suffered burns. Some archaeological evidence even shows long-healed fractures in juvenile skeletons, suggesting accidents were not rare but expected. Caregivers began a different type of vigilance. Whereas infants were kept close by default, toddlers required tracking. Constant eyes. Often multiple adults or older children watched over them. Mothers were often busy with food preparation, tool maintenance, or infant care. So who kept the toddlers alive? Older siblings were the most common babysitters. Children as young as 5 may have been tasked with watching a 2-year-old. Elderly members played an essential role in childcare. Their reduced mobility made them perfect for camp-based supervision. A la parenting, a system where many adults in a group help raise children, meant a toddler was rarely under the exclusive care of one person. If a toddler wandered off, the consequences were severe. Child disappearance due to predators, environmental hazards, or becoming lost was not uncommon. As a result, groups likely developed layered systems of observation and early warning. Toddlers learned fast, but not from books or lessons. Their education was entirely experiential and social. Mimicking tool use, toddlers watched adults nap stone or crack bones and tried to imitate the motions. Pretend foraging. Little ones picked up sticks and dug the ground, mimicking foragers. Speech and gesture. Through observing facial expressions and tone, they began forming their first structured communication. Cultural knowledge was passed not through instruction but immersion. Every moment of a toddler's day was a lesson. They absorbed not only skills but also group norms. What was praised? What was dangerous? What was forbidden? Though life was dangerous, prehistoric toddlers did play. Games involved running, hiding, throwing small objects, and mimicking adult tasks. Children played with bones, sticks, shells, and sometimes carved figurines. Group games may have included mock hunting or simple coordination tasks. Play served several purposes, developed motor skills, encouraged cooperation, helped children bond with siblings and non-relatives. These interactions were also early forms of hierarchy negotiation, learning to share, assert, or retreat in social contexts. As toddlers moved independently and encountered the world, the risk of injury and disease skyrocketed. Falls from height, lacerations from tools. Ingesting toxic plants, exposure to animal waste, diarrheal illness remained a major killer in this age group. Cuts and scrapes became infected easily. Without antibiotics or antiseptics, even minor wounds could lead to septicemia. Treatments included binding wounds with animal fat and plant fibers, applying ashes, honey, or herbal poultices, smoke baths for respiratory conditions still. The toddler years saw continued high mortality. Many children who survived infancy did not survive age 3. By age 2, most children could walk, run short distances, and climb. Language acquisition accelerated. They likely knew dozens of words or gesture words. Memory formation deepened. Toddlers began remembering places, people, and events. Rituals or celebrations may have marked these transitions. A child's first successful imitation of a task, saying their first complete sentence, running an errand in some early societies. The toddler who speaks was seen as having officially entered the community. When camps moved, toddlers traveled too. They were either carried in slings or cradleboards, walked short distances, holding hands or following older children, rode on hips or shoulders during longer journeys. Nomadic life meant danger. Cliff edges, venomous insects and snakes, rough terrain that caused frequent tumbles. Parents had to weigh travel speed against child safety. Sometimes entire groups adjusted pace to match the youngest walkers. By the end of the toddler stage, many children were expected to contribute, if only minimally, carrying small bundles of kindling, alerting adults to animal sounds, mimicking fire tending, or food sorting. This period was critical for learning emotional regulation. It's identifying useful plants and materials, forming social bonds that would persist for life. The children who learned fastest, watched best, and avoided danger most consistently were the ones most likely to survive. In a prehistoric world, a woman wouldn't know she was pregnant through a test or a doctor's confirmation. She would know from signs: a missed cycle, nausea, swelling breasts, sudden fatigue. But these signs weren't always cause for joy. Pregnancy was dangerous. A woman had to carry a growing fetus inside her for 9 months without supplements, clinics, ultrasounds, or antibiotics, all while surviving the brutal day-to-day life of a hunter-gatherer group. There were no pregnancy announcements, no baby showers, just quiet knowledge and rising risk. In early stages, many pregnancies ended in miscarriage. This was so common that some groups may not have even spoken about a pregnancy until it was visibly showing. A loss was expected, and if it came, the group moved on. But once pregnancy progressed, it became a collective concern, because if something went wrong during birth, the mother could die, the baby could die, or both, and every adult in the group knew it. Pregnant woman still had to work. She foraged for edible roots, berries, and tubers, sometimes walking for hours a day. She carried water, gathered firewood, and helped maintain shelter. She often had one or more children already, clinging to her side or riding on her back. There was no resting just because she was pregnant. Rest came only when the group rested, during illness, rain, or forced pauses in migration. There was also no diet plan. She ate what everyone ate. If food was scarce, she ate less. If the hunt failed, she went hungry, which meant the fetus did too. Anthropologists believe the human pelvis is a compromise between walking upright and giving birth. This means childbirth is uniquely hard in humans compared to other animals. Pregnant women in prehistory dealt with back pain from constant movement with poor posture, hip discomfort from walking on uneven terrain, constant exposure to bacteria, bugs, and environmental hazards. They carried their babies without prenatal vitamins, no folic acid, no iron supplements. Their bodies either adapted through years of survival-hardened genetics, or pregnancies ended early. Miscarriage in the first trimester was extremely common. Prehistoric women weren't alone during birth. There's evidence, from modern hunter-gatherer societies and early burial patterns, that some women functioned as informal midwives, elder women who had given birth many times. It's individuals with knowledge of herbal pain relief and birthing positions. Those who knew how to handle complications, breech birth, retained placenta, or excessive bleeding. These women were central to the survival of pregnant women, and their knowledge was likely passed down through generations. The loss of an experienced midwife could affect the survival rate of a whole group. Some groups likely developed herbal preparations for common pregnancy symptoms: ginger for nausea, crushed leaves or bark to reduce swelling, smoke baths to relax muscles, warm stones to ease back pain. Pregnancy might have also involved rituals, protective charms made from shells, teeth, bone songs, or stories passed from mother to daughter, specific gestures to welcome the unborn baby spiritually. While unproven archaeologically, these ideas persist in modern traditional societies and likely have ancient roots. A pregnant woman in the Stone Age faced multiple simultaneous dangers: malnutrition, physical trauma, infection, stress from social conflict, attacks from animals, dangerous climate exposure, and all of it while her body was diverting energy to fetal development. A fall, a bad cut, an untreated infection, any one of them could end the pregnancy. Or her life. Nomadic life didn't stop. Women walked up to 10 kilometers a day while pregnant, crossing rivers, rocky hills, deserts, and forests. Third trimester travel meant greater risk of falling or preterm labor. Camps were set up and torn down frequently. The same sling that had once carried babies now supported swollen bellies under animal hide belts or wrappings. There was no stable bed, no clean pillow, no prenatal clinic, just survival on the move. There is little evidence for how prehistoric people processed emotional stress, but pregnancy was not just physical. Imagine knowing you might die from childbirth, knowing the baby might die after months of effort, knowing your death might leave your existing children without a mother that wait, even if not verbalized, existed. And yet, they carried on, because they had no choice. The final phase, labor, was the most dangerous moment in a woman's life. Most births happened squatting, kneeling, or sitting upright, using gravity to assist. There were no sterile tools, no surgical options, no pain medication. If a baby was too large, poorly positioned, or the labor stalled, the mother could die. If the placenta didn't come out completely, the mother could bleed to death. Some died hours after the baby was born. Some babies were born still, and some survived and joined the fight to survive. Despite all of this, women kept going. Many gave birth to 6 to 10 children over their lifetime. Most buried at least a few of them, some buried all. But each successful birth added another person to the tribe, another potential hunter, another firekeeper, another mother. Each child carried the bloodline forward, and every person alive today is the descendant of a woman who survived all of this. In prehistoric times, childbirth wasn't just a personal milestone. It was a brutal test of survival. It was the single most dangerous event in a woman's life. It wasn't just the mother at risk, it was also the baby, without modern medicine, sterile tools, or surgical interventions. Birth was a moment of immense physical danger and emotional uncertainty. This chapter dives into the world of prehistoric labor, where women gave birth, who helped them, what risks they faced, and how groups responded when things went terribly wrong. There were no hospitals, no clinics, no clean delivery rooms. Women gave birth wherever the group settled, in a cave, under a lean-to, in a hut, or even outdoors if necessary. Sometimes a spot just outside the main camp was chosen, for a bit of privacy, to reduce the smell of blood that could attract predators, and to keep noise from disturbing others. The birthing space was likely padded with hides or dry grasses. Warmth and safety were the only luxuries available. There was no pain relief, no epidurals, no numbing injections, not even clean water to cool her face. Labor might last several hours or days. Women squatted, leaned on rocks or other people, or knelt over blankets. They gripped branches or ropes to brace during contractions. Screaming was dangerous. It could attract animals or give away the camp's location. Everything had to be endured, alone or with the help of trusted women nearby. Most prehistoric women didn't give birth alone. Elder women experienced mothers, and midwives likely offered guidance and hands-on help. Their roles helped the mother shift positions to ease labor, applied pressure, rubbed her back, whispered instructions, tied and cut the umbilical cord, checked the baby's position, and pulled when necessary. These helpers were essential and likely revered. They weren't doctors, but they were the difference between life and death. Childbirth could go wrong in countless ways. Hemorrhaging, heavy bleeding after delivery could not be stopped. Obstructed labor. The baby might not fit through the birth canal. Breech births. Feet-first deliveries increased the risk of death. Infection. If the placenta didn't come out fully, or if tools weren't clean. Exhaustion. A mother who labored for 2 days might simply collapse. If something went wrong, there were no emergency solutions, no C-sections, no transfusions. She died. Even if the mother survived, the baby still faced danger in the first few minutes of life. The umbilical cord could be wrapped around the neck. The baby could arrive too early. It might not cry or breathe immediately. A birth assistant might rub the baby briskly to stimulate breathing, blow gently into its face, or clear mucus from its nose. Press the infant against the mother's chest for warmth. But if none of that worked, they could only wait. There was no CPR, no oxygen masks. If the baby didn't survive, there was nothing more to do. Even if delivery went well, the third stage of labor, the placenta, still posed a threat. If the placenta didn't come out fully, the mother could bleed out or die from infection days later. If she bled too much immediately, she could lose consciousness and never wake up. The group had to monitor her closely for days, checking her strength, bleeding, and temperature. Childbirth didn't end at the baby's arrival. It ended only when the mother was stable and alive. Sometimes the mother didn't survive. In those cases, the newborn faced steep odds. Unless another woman in the group could breastfeed the baby, it would likely die of starvation. If it survived, it would need a new caretaker, constant feeding and body warmth, a place in the group. Some groups buried mother and infant together. Others tried to raise the baby as their own, but the cost was enormous. The group didn't just lose a woman, they lost a hunter, a gatherer, a fire tender, a teacher, a partner, a friend. A woman who survived multiple births was seen differently. She became a midwife for others. She passed on birthing wisdom to daughters and granddaughters. Her body bore the marks of survival. Scars, stretched skin, maybe broken tailbones or hips. She was proof that survival was possible. And in a world where so many didn't make it, that meant everything. Human birth is difficult for evolutionary reasons. We walk upright. This narrowed the pelvis. Evolved large brains, meaning big-headed babies. It's a biological bottleneck. Too big? The mother dies. Too small, the brain doesn't develop. So babies are born earlier than other mammals. That's why newborn humans are so helpless and need years of support. That's why childbirth was, and is, so dangerous. But sometimes, it went right. The mother survived. The baby cried, nursed, and slept. The group smiled, quietly, gratefully. There may have been no celebration, just a long exhale, a relieved silence, a new child to protect, a woman restored. And once again, life continued. Surviving childbirth was only the beginning. In the prehistoric world, the real challenge began the moment a baby entered the world. Small, vulnerable, and utterly dependent. For the next few months, every day would be a fight for survival. This chapter explores how prehistoric families and entire communities worked to keep their newborns alive through warmth, nourishment, protection, and constant care. The hours after birth were the most critical in a baby's life. Hypothermia was an immediate threat. Even in warm climates, newborns couldn't regulate their own temperature. Skin-to-skin contact with the mother was the primary defense. Her body heat was the baby's incubator. Babies were wrapped in animal hides, bark cloth, or dried grasses to help insulate them. If the baby didn't cry, didn't breathe well, or didn't nurse, the group prepared for the worst. There were no medical interventions, no warming lamps, no neonatal units. Just instinct, experience, and hope. Breast milk was not optional. It was the only chance a baby had. Colostrum, produced in the first days, gave newborns critical antibodies. Full milk supply followed, feeding the baby every hour or two, day and night. Mothers held babies constantly, while sitting, walking, or working. If the mother couldn't produce enough milk, another woman, often a sister, aunt, or grandmother, might nurse the baby. If no wet nurse was available, the child would likely die within days. There were no bottles, no formula, no clean water. A hungry baby was a dying baby. Everything was a threat. Cold nights could kill in minutes. Open flames and embers could cause fatal burns. Insects, snakes, and rodents brought disease or death. Larger predators could be drawn by crying or the scent of blood. Infants were never left alone. They were carried in slings, cradled in arms, or strapped to a parent's back. Sleeping adults curled protectively around them. Even within the camp, constant awareness was necessary. A distracted moment could mean a fatal accident. Survival wasn't just the mother's responsibility. Older siblings were expected to help. Grandmothers monitored the baby's breathing, skin color, and crying. Other adults gathered food, tended fires, or protected the group. This system is called alloparenting, a shared care model that still exists in some hunter-gatherer societies today. No one could raise a baby alone in the prehistoric world. Everyone had a role in keeping the newborn alive. There were no cribs, no blankets, no nursery. Babies slept on or beside the mother. The group often formed sleeping circles, with babies in the warm, protected center. But even sleep came with danger. Infants could be rolled on or smothered unintentionally. If left too close to fire, they could be burned. If laid too far away, they could freeze or be taken by animals. Most groups developed instinctive ways to check on babies throughout the night. Mothers slept lightly, stirred often, and rarely let go. The most common killers of newborns were diarrheal diseases from contaminated water or early weaning, respiratory infections caused by smoke or cold air, skin infections or sepsis from untreated wounds. There were no antibiotics, but there were treatments: honey or crushed herbs applied to rashes, smoke baths to ease congestion, breast milk used on wounds or eye infections, herbal teas for nursing mothers to pass immunity to the baby. These remedies didn't always work, but they sometimes made the difference between life and death. Every sign of progress gave hope. First suckling, first grip, first eye contact, first alert cry. Mothers, midwives, and elders all watched for these milestones. But if a baby remained silent, limp, or unresponsive for too long, the group quietly accepted the likely outcome. In some cultures, a baby wasn't named until it had survived its first few weeks or months. Naming meant it had entered the group officially. Around 6 months of age, weaning began. Pre-chewed food, like berries, tubers, or meat, was offered by mouth. Breastfeeding continued for months or years alongside solids. But weaning came with risk. New foods often introduced bacteria. Infants had immature immune systems. Weaning diarrhea was one of the most common causes of death for prehistoric children. Others adjusted slowly, watching for signs of distress after each new food. Feeding was cautious, deliberate, measured in tiny steps. Survival wasn't just physical, it was cultural. Infants who passed early tests, sleeping well, feeding consistently, were given beads, shells, or charms. Some groups performed protective rituals, smudging with smoke, singing lullabies, or whispering names. Others waited, giving no name or sign of recognition until survival seemed likely. Once an infant was named, it was fully human in the eyes of the group, not just a life, but a soul. Not every baby survived. Infant graves from prehistory show signs of care: red ochre on tiny bones, shell beads laid on the body, burial beside mothers who died in childbirth. Even when survival was rare, love wasn't. Prehistoric people grieved, quietly, collectively, and then they tried again, because every baby who survived wasn't just a child, it was the future. Prehistoric life didn't stay in one place. Camps moved often, following food, water, or safety. Sometimes the group relocated every few weeks. Other times, entire migrations spanned seasons or years. For children, especially those under age 7, this constant movement shaped every part of their development. From how they slept to how they learned, life on the move wasn't just a phase, it was the norm. Prehistoric people didn't build permanent homes. Most lived in temporary shelters made of wood, bone, hides, or whatever materials were available. Groups moved because seasonal changes dried up water sources or froze hunting grounds. Game animals migrated. Rival groups threatened territory. Waste and parasites built up in a camp, making it unsafe. Children quickly understood. When adults packed up, everything moved, including them. Babies and toddlers didn't walk far. They were carried. Infants were wrapped in slings made of animal hides, bark fiber, or woven plant material. These were strapped across shoulders, hips, or backs. Some groups used cradle boards, rigid wooden frames that protected the baby's head and spine. These carriers weren't just for travel, they allowed mothers to breastfeed while walking, keep their hands free for gathering, protect the infant from hazards like sharp rocks, fire, or predators. Even when resting, the baby stayed close, often strapped to a caregiver's body. Once a child could walk around age 2 or 3, they started walking short distances during travel days. But that came with limitations. Their pace was slow, they tired quickly. They were prone to wandering or stopping to touch everything. To adapt, groups took frequent rest breaks, assigned older siblings or cousins to guide toddlers, rotated who carried them when needed. Mobility wasn't optional, so every child, even the smallest, became part of the movement rhythm. Travel was risky, especially for small children. Sharp rocks and roots tore up bare feet, thorn bushes or hidden holes caused injury. Toddlers could fall behind and get separated. Dangerous animals like snakes, wolves, or big cats might be nearby. Steep cliffs or rivers posed deadly risks. To prevent tragedy, children were closely supervised. If the terrain was especially dangerous, dense forests, narrow passes, or predator-heavy zones, children were either carried or held by the hand the entire way. When the group stopped to camp, children explored nearby areas. Often in packs, adults cleared hazards like fire pits or jagged rocks. Sleeping areas were arranged with kids and vulnerable members in the center. Tools and food were placed out of reach. The structure of the camp was often designed with children's safety in mind. Kids needed space to rest, but also protection and easy access to warmth, water, and caregivers. Children didn't just follow, they absorbed everything. They memorized migration routes, landmarks, and seasonal changes. They learned what plants to avoid and which were edible. They watched for animal tracks or listened for the sounds of danger. Older kids learned from walking near elders who told stories, identified plants, or explained the group's path. By the time a child reached age 6 or 7, they often knew which caves stayed dry during storms, where berries grew best in summer, when herds crossed rivers. Movement was the classroom. Travel toughened children physically. They learned to balance on uneven ground. They built leg strength from walking long distances. They carried light loads to build endurance. Even toddlers might carry a stick for balance, a pouch of berries, a shell or a small tool. These tasks weren't symbolic. They were real contributions. Every step made them stronger. Every journey prepared them for adult survival. Travel didn't stop for illness, and it rarely stopped for injury. If a child became sick, they were carried, kept warm with hides and body heat, fed soft foods or teas made from medicinal plants. If the illness was severe, the group might delay moving or leave a few members behind temporarily. For minor injuries, cuts, burns, fevers, caregivers improvised, wrapping wounds with fibers and herbs, smearing clay or ash to stop bleeding, using smoke to treat respiratory problems. Travel didn't allow for long recovery, so adaptation and quick treatment were key. Older siblings had vital roles in keeping younger kids safe. They walked beside toddlers and held their hands, helped lift them over obstacles, kept them entertained during long stops. This also served as social training. Older children learned patience, responsibility, and observation, all while bonding with their younger kin. By age 4 to 6, most children could walk several miles per day, carry small loads of firewood or water, stay quiet during dangerous moments, recognize animal sounds or track signs. These weren't exceptional kids. This was the average. Children raised on the move adapted quickly. Their bodies grew resilient. Their minds became attuned to nature. Their instincts sharpened. They didn't just travel, they learned to move with purpose. Raising a child in the prehistoric world meant living through a constant tug-of-war between care and crisis. There were no books, no doctors, and no certainty. Families had to rely on instinct, group knowledge, and a whole lot of luck. In this chapter, we explore how children were raised, what values were passed down, and what the real chances of survival looked like for a child born 50,000 years ago. In the prehistoric world, the family was more than just mom, dad, and children. It was an extended network. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and often even unrelated adults living together in small, tight-knit groups. Raising children was everyone's job. Mothers cared for infants, but older siblings carried toddlers. Grandparents told stories and taught lessons, and others stepped in when needed. This system of shared parenting is called allo parenting, and it still exists in modern hunter-gatherer societies. It increased a child's chances of survival dramatically. There were no schools or structured lessons. Prehistoric children learned by immersion. Child learned to sharpen a stone tool by watching it happen 100 times. They learned what plants to eat by copying older kids. Trial and error played a big role, but too many mistakes could be fatal, so learning had to happen quickly and be constantly reinforced through repetition. Imitation was everything. And from a very early age, kids were active participants in daily life. Rules weren't optional, they were life-saving. Children had to learn to stay quiet when needed, avoid dangerous areas, and obey commands quickly. A child who cried near a predator, wandered too far, or touched the wrong plant could endanger not only themselves but the entire group. Discipline wasn't about punishment. It was about keeping the child and everyone else alive. And it started young. By age 4 or 5, children were already helping with chores, gathering sticks for firewood, carrying small baskets, and even watching younger siblings. This wasn't just busy work. Child's contribution helped feed the group or keep others warm. Even small tasks like chasing birds away from drying meat were important. Praise came from usefulness, not just from cuteness or charm. Children who could help were valuable.
Ow.
Those who didn't learn to contribute were a burden. In most prehistoric societies, boys and girls learned different roles as they grew older. Boys often joined men on hunts, learned how to track animals, and made weapons. Girls worked with women, foraging, cooking, making tools, and caring for babies. But roles weren't always strict. A girl with a good eye might learn to hunt. A boy interested in plants might learn what was safe to eat. Survival mattered more than rigid rules. Even in tough environments, children played. They played games that helped them learn physical skills, like throwing, hiding, chasing, or tracking. They carved pretend tools, mimicked the adults, or made up stories. Play helped develop coordination, social skills, memory, creativity. And it built bonds between children, bonds that often lasted into adulthood. Parents formed deep emotional bonds with their children. Love wasn't a modern invention. It's always been part of what it means to be human, but loss was also part of that reality. A fever, an animal bite, or a contaminated stream could end a life in hours. Parents often grieved silently and then kept going. Burial sites from prehistoric times show that children were loved. Graves of infants and toddlers often contain beads, ochre, or small offerings, signs that they were mourned and remembered. Survival rates were brutal. Nearly half of all children died before the age of 5. Many others didn't survive to adolescence. Only a small percentage lived long enough to become parents themselves. This is why prehistoric women often had many children. It wasn't about large families for convenience. It was a biological and social necessity. By the time children reached 9 to 12 years old, they were already taking on adult roles. Boys joined hunts, set traps, or helped defend the group. Girls managed food preparation, cared for babies, and maintained the camp. There may have been rites of passage, early signs of adulthood, like a first successful hunt, or the ability to manage fire on one's own. But more often, adulthood came not from ceremony, but from function. If you could do what needed to be done, you were grown. Prehistoric families didn't just raise children to survive, they raised them to carry knowledge. Every child who lived became a bearer of stories, techniques, warnings, and skills passed on from thousands of years before. Teaching a child was investing in the group's future, and raising them was one of the most sacred tasks prehistoric humans ever undertook. In the prehistoric world, death was a constant presence, but nowhere was it more common or more heartbreaking than in childhood. A child born in the Stone Age had to survive not only the harsh elements, predators and hunger, but also illness, injury, and accidents. In this chapter, we all take a closer look at how and why so many children died before reaching adulthood, and what their short lives and deaths tell us about the human experience. Roughly 40% to 50% of all children died before the age of 5, and many of those deaths happened in the first year of life. Some never made it past a few days. These statistics come not from guesswork, but from actual excavated burial sites, where archaeologists have counted and studied the remains of children across prehistoric settlements. It wasn't rare, it was the norm. A family with 6 children might see only 2 grow up. Some saw none. The reasons were as varied as they were brutal. Infections, especially after childbirth cuts or burns. Diarrhea and dehydration. Major killers of infants and toddlers. Respiratory illnesses from smoke, cold, or poor air circulation. Malnutrition, either from famine or lack of proper weaning foods. Poisoning from plants or bad water. Snake bites or stings. Falling from cliffs or into water. animal attacks, accidents with fire or tools. Even something as simple as a tooth infection could become fatal without antibiotics. The first few weeks after birth were the most dangerous time of all. If a baby was born prematurely, too small, or struggled to breathe, there was little anyone could do. Mothers might bleed out, and infants could be too weak to nurse. And even if both survived the birth, cold weather, contaminated water, or an unnoticed fever could end things in a matter of hours. Once a child started walking, new threats appeared. They could crawl into fire, wander too far from the group, or ingest a toxic berry or mushroom. Injuries from falls or sharp tools were common, and there were no hospitals. A broken leg could lead to death if infection set in. Small children were also easy targets for predators like big cats, wolves, or even large birds of prey. Prehistoric people understood death intimately. It was part of life. We didn't shield children from it because they couldn't. Kids saw siblings die. Parents buried their babies. Communities mourned together, but also moved on because they had to. Many children never knew their fathers, who might have died hunting or in conflict. Some never met older siblings, and as much as adults tried to protect the young, there was only so much they could do. We know prehistoric people grieved because they left behind signs of love. In Europe and Africa, burial sites of children include beads or jewelry laid beside the body, red ochre sprinkled on the bones, possibly a spiritual or symbolic gesture, carefully placed bodies, sometimes wrapped in hides, tiny tools or carved items given to the child in death. Some graves appear to be marked or revisited. These weren't anonymous deaths. They were personal losses. You might wonder, did prehistoric people stop feeling pain after so much death? Evidence suggests no, human attachment runs deep. Even when mortality is common, the pain doesn't disappear. It just becomes a part of daily life. Parents probably didn't get used to it. Instead, they developed cultural tools to cope: songs, rituals, storytelling, perhaps spiritual beliefs about the afterlife or rebirth. In modern hunter-gatherer cultures, the loss of a child is still mourned, even when it happens often. Growing up surrounded by death left its mark. Children who lived often carried emotional weight, survivor's guilt, a strong sense of caution. Deep ties to siblings or cousins who also survived accelerated maturity. It also made them resilient. They learned how fragile life was and how precious. High child mortality influenced everything. Families had more children to increase survival odds. Group roles adapted to include more childminders. Tools and shelters were designed to protect infants. Dangerous places were avoided. Group migration schedules often considered the needs of the youngest. Culture evolved to keep children alive and to grieve when they didn't make it. We often think of prehistoric life as cold and indifferent, but that's not true. Even in a world where death was normal, childhood death wasn't meaningless. Each child lost was a future not lived, a name not passed down, a story never told. And yet, every child raised carried forward thousands of years of survival, memory, and resilience. Their lives and their deaths shaped the future of humanity. By today's standards, teenagers are still considered kids. But in the Stone Age, there was no such thing as adolescence as we know it. The moment a child was physically capable of contributing like an adult, they were expected to. This chapter explores what life was like for prehistoric youth between the ages of about 10 and 18, the years when they transitioned from helpers to full participants in survival, social life, and sometimes even parenting in prehistoric societies. There was no clear line between childhood and adulthood, but most evidence shows that by age 12 or 13, the expectations changed. Girls often became mothers by 14 or 15. Boys might be expected to hunt, protect, or lead by their mid-teens. Both were seen as full members of the group, not just learners. This wasn't because people rushed things. It was because the average lifespan was shorter, and survival required early maturity. Physical changes like voice deepening, menstruation, or muscle growth were milestones. They told the group, this child is ready to take on more. With those changes came responsibilities. Longer hunting trips for boys, participation in food preparation or medicine gathering for girls, possibly marriage or pair bonding, watching over younger children independently. Some cultures, physical milestone, like a girl's first period or a boy's first kill. may have triggered informal rites of passage. Even though they were now grown, teens were still learning, just from different sources. Teenage boys learned survival strategies directly from older men. Teenage girls gained deeper skills in healing, food storage, or navigation from elder women. Stories, mistakes, and observation replaced the play-based learning of childhood. Many learned through trial by fire, being left to navigate terrain, care for a sibling alone, or lead part of a group task. Ling was part of growing. Stone Age teens were physically active constantly. Teenage boys ran, climbed, tracked, and threw weapons daily. Girls carried loads of food or water over long distances, processed hides, or helped birth children. Both developed muscle strength, stamina, and reflexes simply by living. They didn't need a gym. Life was the gym. By age 15, most prehistoric teens could walk 10+ miles in a day, fast for long periods, carry adult loads, react quickly to threats. Modern teenagers often face identity issues, but prehistoric youth didn't have the luxury to focus inward for long. Emotional maturity was demanded early. Handling fear during hunts, grieving dead siblings or parents, managing group conflict, taking responsibility for others. Still, they laughed, bonded, and even rebelled at times. Emotional support came from elders and peers, often through storytelling, shared tasks, quiet mentorship, not lectures. By mid to late teens, most individuals were paired with a mate, helping raise younger siblings or children of their own, managing group tasks solo, earning a reputation as reliable, strong, clever, or reckless. Marriage wasn't always formal, but many teens were forming attachments that impacted group dynamics, especially if births resulted. Some societies may have allowed flexibility, breaking and reforming bonds, depending on survival needs and group size. Being a teen didn't mean you were safe. Young men were injured or killed during hunts. Young women died in childbirth or from infection. Accidents still happened, falling into rivers, animal attacks, or internal injuries. But teenage years were also a time of proving. Survival meant status. Strength meant influence. Those who made it through gained trust, leadership, potential, and future authority. Teenagers made mistakes, wandering too far, ignoring warnings, mishandling tools. But unlike today, those mistakes could be fatal or get others hurt. So teens were watched closely, not as children, but as apprentices to the adult world. Reputation started forming early. Single careless act could mark someone as unreliable. Bold success could make them a future leader. Oral tradition was how prehistoric youth understood who they were becoming. Elders told stories of heroic hunts, of tragic losses, of lessons learned through failure. These stories weren't entertainment, they were curriculum. Teens learned to see themselves in these tales. They imagined their own future roles. Eventually, they told those stories to the next generation. By the end of this stage, around 17 or 18, a young person had typically helped kill large game, watched a death or birth, traveled long distances, made tools, clothes, or medicines, taken a life, or nearly lost their own. At this point, there was no distinction. You were an adult, not by age, but by contribution. There was no graduation ceremony, no birthday party, just the silent acknowledgement from others. You had become part of the foundation on which the group stood. What does it really mean to grow up in a world without electricity, medicine, or written language? A world where every bite of food is earned, every illness is a threat, and every adult was once a child who beat impossible odds. In this final chapter, we look back at what prehistoric childhood teaches us, not just about survival, but about humanity itself. From the moment they were born, prehistoric children were in training. Every movement, every sound, every interaction helped shape their ability to survive. They weren't waiting to become useful. They were useful from the start. Watching fires, fetching water, learning plants and tracks, absorbing social cues. Childhood wasn't a time of protected innocence. It was a period of rapid, essential growth. Most children never reached adulthood. The constant threat of illness, hunger, predators, accidents, conflict meant that survival was never taken for granted. Each child who made it was exceptional, either through strength, intelligence, support, or pure luck. Every adult alive in a prehistoric tribe was a survivor of loss, fear, and adaptation. Families didn't raise children alone. The entire group participated in teaching, protecting, and shaping each child. This made childhood more resilient. If a parent died, the child still had care. If a lesson was missed, another adult could teach it. If a danger came, multiple people could respond. Children weren't personal possessions. They were investments in the future of the group. There were no schools, no exams, but learning happened every day. How to walk quietly in the forest, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to sense danger in silence, how to listen when an elder speaks. Success wasn't measured in grades. It was measured in survival. Knowledge passed down wasn't optional. It was sacred. Despite all the hardship, children laughed, played with bones and shells, imitated adults, told jokes, and invented games. They bonded with siblings, formed rivalries, and found comfort in storytelling. Even in a brutal world, human joy persisted. Some of the oldest toys ever discovered, carved animals, dolls, whistles, prove that play has always been a part of being human. Prehistoric families lost children often, but they didn't stop loving them. Burials, pigments, and objects left with tiny skeletons show care, memory, and mourning. Parents grieved deeply, but they also moved forward, not because they were unfeeling, but because survival demanded it. That balance of grief and resilience is something we still carry today. The children who made it into adulthood often shared key traits: alertness, patience, physical coordination, memory, empathy, emotional control. These traits weren't taught in classrooms. They were practiced daily through real-world experience. It wasn't just about strength. Some of the most important survival traits were social and emotional. Every adult was once a child who learned how to hunt or gather, felt fear during a storm, heard the stories of ancestors, sat beside a fire, watching, listening, absorbing. Their childhood determined how well they could raise others, lead others, keep the group alive. And in that way, childhood shaped not just individuals, but entire cultures. We are their descendants. Every modern person alive today comes from an unbroken line of survivors. Children who didn't die, who grew up, who adapted, and who raised more children. Their instincts, fears, rituals, and knowledge live inside us. Our preference for warmth, our social bonding, our fear of the dark, our love of stories. These are echoes of a prehistoric childhood. Modern life is filled with comforts, medicine, shelter, clean water, education. But looking back reminds us of something primal. We are capable of extraordinary resilience. Prehistoric childhood was not easy, but it was rich in experience, connection, and meaning. Children were not protected, but they were respected, expected to rise, expected to contribute, and often they did. Their legacy is in every tool, every word, every survival instinct we still carry. And in remembering their stories, we remember something ancient and true about ourselves.